A homeless veteran inherited a single, rusty shipping container in the middle of nowhere. What he found inside would not just change his life, but redefine the very meaning of the word. If you've ever felt lost or believed that your story was over, I need you to listen to this. And if you feel a connection to what I'm about to share, maybe consider subscribing, because this is a place for stories like ours. The air in the shelter's administrative office was always the same. Stale coffee, disinfectant, and the quiet hum of a computer that had seen better days. It was a sound I'd come to associate with bad news, or at least news that was inconvenient for the person delivering it. I sat opposite a woman named Ms. Albright, a lawyer whose suit probably cost more than every worldly possession I had stuffed into my rucksack. She'd been sent by the state. My hands were tucked under my thighs to stop them from shaking. It wasn't from cold, not really. It was the tremor that had set in after my second tour and never quite left, a low-grade hum of the body, remembering things the mind tried to forget. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice professionally gentle, like a doctor about to explain a complicated but painless procedure. She slid a thick manila envelope across the particle board desk. It stopped a few inches from my clasped hands. "I'm the executor of your grandfather's estate." I stared at the envelope. My grandfather, Elias Thorne. The name felt like a ghost on my tongue. I hadn't seen him since I was 10, a few months before my mother died and the state stepped in. He was a quiet, weathered man with hands like old leather and eyes that seemed to hold the gray of 1,000 winter skies. He'd send a card for my birthday every year, no matter what group home I was in. A $20 bill tucked inside, with the same 7 words written in a shaky but determined script. "Be good. Stay strong. I am proud." The last one had arrived 2 years ago, on my 18th, right before I enlisted. Then, nothing. "His estate?" I said, the words tasting like rust. "He lived in a one-room cabin. He didn't have an estate. He had a pension and a bad back." "That's not entirely accurate," Ms. Albright said, folding her hands on her desk. She had that lawyerly patience that always felt like a trap. "He did not have much in the way of liquid assets, it's true. But he did own property, outright. A small parcel of land in Havenwood County." I must have looked as blank as I felt, because she continued. "It's about 5 acres, undeveloped. He left it to you. It's your only inheritance." 5 acres. The words hung in the stale air. For a man whose entire world had shrunk to the size of a cot and a footlocker, 5 acres sounded like a kingdom. But I knew better. Undeveloped was a nice way of saying worthless. A patch of dirt and rock somewhere up north where the cell signal went to die. "And?" I asked, my voice flat. I knew there was a catch. There was always a catch. "And," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the envelope, "there is a standing offer on the property. A development firm, Cascade Holdings, has been trying to acquire the surrounding parcels for a new resort project. They've offered $10,000 for your 5 acres. $10,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. It was a fortune. It was a bus ticket to somewhere warm. It was a security deposit on a small apartment. It was 3 months of not having to look over my shoulder, of not having to wonder where my next meal was coming from. It was a way out. It was a clean break. "They need your signature," she said softly. "The paperwork is right here. You could walk out of here with a check in your name by the end of the day." I finally reached for the envelope. My fingers brushed against the smooth paper. It felt heavy, heavier than it should have. I thought of my grandfather's letters. Be good, stay strong. What did that mean now? Was taking the money and running the strong thing to do? It felt like it. It felt like survival. What's on the property? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Is it just land? Ms. Albright hesitated for a fraction of a second, a tiny flicker in her professional calm. The deed lists the land and all structures thereupon. According to the county assessor's last report from about 6 months ago, the only structure on the property is a single shipping container. A rusty metal box on a patch of worthless dirt. That was my inheritance, my kingdom, the sum total of my grandfather's legacy. A joke with a $10,000 punchline. I pulled the papers from the envelope, my eyes scanning the legal jargon, the dense blocks of text that were about to sign away a place I'd never seen, a memory I barely had. The developer's offer was on top, crisp and official. All it needed was my signature. My hand was still shaking. But this time, it wasn't the tremor. It was something else. It was a choice. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt like mine to make. I looked up at Ms. Albright, the pen she offered hanging in the air between us, a bridge between two completely different worlds. I should have taken it. Every rational part of my brain, every hungry, cold, and exhausted cell in my body screamed at me to sign the paper and take the money. But I didn't. Instead, I heard myself say 4 words that would change everything. I want to see it. Ms. Albright's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise? Respect? I couldn't tell. She simply nodded, retracted the pen, and folded her hands again. As is your right. The property is located just outside the town of Northwood. It's a considerable distance. Are you sure, Mr. Thorne? The offer is fair, given the land's current valuation. It's mostly rock and scrub pine. I'm sure, I said, the words feeling more solid this time. The decision wasn't logical. It was a gut feeling, a faint echo of my grandfather's quiet stubbornness that I didn't even know I possessed. The $10,000 felt like an ending. It was a neat, tidy conclusion to a story I'd never gotten to read. Going there, seeing it for myself, that felt like a beginning. Even if the beginning was just a rusty box on a forgotten piece of land. Very well, she said. The deed is in here, along with a plat map. It's officially yours. What you do with it is your decision. She slid a small, folded piece of paper across the desk. It was a bus schedule. The Northwood bus leaves from the downtown terminal at 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's the only one. I tucked the schedule into my pocket and stood up, the thick envelope clutched in my hand. It felt like a shield. Thank you, Ms. Albright. Leo, she said, using my first name for the first time. I stopped at the door. Your grandfather was a good man. He spoke of you often in his letters to my office. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and walked out, the door clicking shut behind me. The hallway of the shelter seemed dimmer, the air thicker. I went back to my cot, the quiet hum of institutional life buzzing around me. I pulled out the contents of the envelope again, spreading them on the thin wool blanket. The deed, the map, the developer's offer. And at the very bottom, tucked into a flap, was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was pitted with rust, the kind of key that opened a lock you had to force. There was a small, tarnished brass tag attached to it by a piece of wire. Scratched into the tag was one word: home. I held the key in my palm, its cold weight a strange comfort. Home. a word I hadn't used for myself in over a decade. It had always been a room, a cot, a bunk, a placement, never a home. I spent the last of my cash on a one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of, to see a shipping container I couldn't imagine. It was the most reckless and the most hopeful thing I had ever done. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't dream of the desert, of sand and shouting and the whine of engines. I dreamed of pine trees and cold, clear air and the sound of an old iron key turning in a lock. It was a quiet dream, a peaceful one, and it was enough. The bus groaned its way out of the city before the sun had even thought about rising. The streetlights painted sickly yellow stripes across the faces of the other passengers, a collection of tired-looking people heading toward early shifts or distant towns. I had a window seat, my rucksack on the seat beside me like a silent companion. The city, with its noise and its concrete and its crushing anonymity, slowly dissolved into suburbs, and then into the sprawling, dark countryside. I watched the world go by, a blur of sleeping houses and empty fields. The journey was a long, slow unwinding. With every mile that passed, a layer of the city's grime seemed to peel away from me. The tension in my shoulders, a constant companion for as long as I could remember, began to ease. I thought about the $10,000. The smart move, the logical move, would have been to sign the paper. I could be on a different bus right now, heading south, toward warmth and a new start. But every time I pictured myself doing it, a hollow feeling opened up in my chest. It felt like selling a memory I didn't even have. It felt like betraying that quiet, weathered man from my childhood. The man who wrote, "I am proud," on a birthday card and sent it to a boy he hadn't seen in years. What kind of man leaves his grandson a shipping container? Maybe he was eccentric. Maybe he was poor. Or maybe, and this thought was a tiny, fragile seed in the back of my mind, maybe there was a reason, a purpose. My life had been a series of reactions, following orders, moving when I was told to move, staying where I was told to stay. From the foster system to the army, I had always been an object in motion, directed by other forces. This trip, this illogical, impractical journey toward a rusty metal box, was the first proactive decision I had made in my adult life. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Hours bled into one another. The landscape changed, the flat fields giving way to rolling hills, then to the dense, dark green of pine forests. The air that hissed from the bus's vents started to smell different, cleaner, with a sharp, resinous tang. We stopped in a series of small towns with names like Haven and Ridgeview, places with a single main street, a diner, a post office, and a handful of houses. People got on and off, their conversations a low murmur of local news and familiar greetings. I felt like a ghost, an observer passing through lives that were rooted and real. Finally, in the late afternoon, the bus driver called out, "Northwood!" I grabbed my pack and shuffled to the front. I was the only one getting off. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a small general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign painted on its side. The driver gave me a curious look. "You sure this is your stop, son? Not much out here." "This is it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He shrugged and pulled the lever to open the door. "Bus back to the city comes through tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Don't miss it." I stepped out, and the bus pulled away with a sigh of air brakes, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes and an almost shocking silence. The town of Northwood wasn't much of a town at all. It was a crossroads. The general store, a gas station with old-fashioned pumps, and a small diner with a flickering neon "open" sign. A few houses were visible through the trees. That was it. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It felt like a different planet from the city I'd left that morning. I went into the general store. A bell above the door chimed. An old man with a magnificent white beard sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up at me over his spectacles. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm looking for a piece of land," I said, pulling out the map Ms. Albright had given me. I unfolded it on the counter. It was a simple, hand-drawn-looking thing, marking a parcel off a dirt road called Old Mill Road. It belonged to a man named Elias Thorne. The old man's eyes softened at the name. He took off his glasses and leaned in to look at the map. "Elias. Sure, I knew Elias. Quiet fella, kept to himself mostly. You family?" "His grandson," I said. "Well, I'll be," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "He was a good man, your granddad. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man." He tapped a spot on the map with a thick finger. "You're here. Old Mill Road is about 2 miles east of here. You can't miss it. It's the only dirt turnoff for miles. His plot is another mile down that road. You'll see the container from the road." He looked at my rucksack. "You walking?" I nodded. He grunted, a sound of disapproval. "It'll be dark in an hour. Weather's turning too. Can feel it in my bones." He looked me over, his gaze sharp but not unkind. He saw the worn-out boots, the fatigue in my eyes. "You look like you could use a hot meal before you head out there. Diner next door makes a decent stew. Tell Martha that Cal sent you." "Thanks," I said, folding the map. "I'm Leo." "Cal," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from a lifetime of work. It was a handshake that felt like an anchor. I took his advice. The diner was warm and smelled of coffee and fried onions. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, who I assumed was Martha, served me a bowl of beef stew that was so hot it fogged up the window next to my booth. It was the best meal I'd had in months. I ate slowly, making it last. I watched the sky outside the window turn from a pale, watery blue to a deep, bruised purple. The first snowflakes began to fall, fat and wet, melting as they hit the glass. Cal was right. The weather was turning. I paid for my meal, leaving a bigger tip than I could really afford, and stepped back out into the cold. The snow was coming down harder now, a thick, silent curtain that muffled the world. I pulled up my collar, settled my rucksack on my shoulders, and started walking east, toward a dirt road, a patch of land, and a rusty metal box that held the sum of my inheritance. The snow swirled around me, and for a moment I felt a surge of panic. I was alone, miles from anywhere, walking into the dark and the cold. But then I thought of my grandfather. "Stubborn as a mule," Cal had said. I clenched my fists in my pockets and kept walking. I had to see it. I had to know. The 2 miles to Old Mill Road felt like 10. The snow was sticking now, blanketing the asphalt in a thin layer of white. My boots, already worn, were quickly soaked through, and a damp chill began to creep up my legs. The world had shrunk to the narrow beam of my small flashlight and the sound of my own breathing, ragged in the cold air. There were no streetlights out here, no houses, just the towering, silent shapes of pine trees lining the road, their branches heavy with snow. It was a profound and intimidating darkness, the kind that makes you feel very small. I almost missed the turnoff. It was just a narrow gap in the trees, the dirt track already covered in a few inches of snow. A weathered, barely legible wooden sign nailed to a tree read, "Old Mill Road." This was it. I took a deep breath, the icy air stinging my lungs, and turned onto the path. The walking got harder immediately. The ground was uneven beneath the snow, and I stumbled several times, my ankles twisting on hidden rocks and roots. The silence was even deeper here, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps and the soft, rhythmic patter of snow falling on the trees. I kept the flashlight beam aimed at the ground in front of me, trying to follow the faint impression of the road. I was starting to feel a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The warmth of the diner felt like a distant memory. Doubt began to creep in, cold and insidious as the dampness in my boots. What was I doing out here? This was insane. I should have taken the money. I could be in a warm motel room right now, with a television and a dry pair of socks. Instead, I was freezing, lost in the middle of a forest, chasing a ghost. I was on the verge of turning back, of admitting defeat and trying to hitch a ride back to the city in the morning, when my flashlight beam caught something. A shape, darker than the surrounding trees, looming in the darkness ahead. It was long, rectangular, and unnatural. My heart started to beat a little faster. I pushed forward, the snow getting deeper, and the shape resolved itself. It was a shipping container, long, corrugated, and covered in a thick layer of rust that looked almost black in the faint light. It sat in a small clearing, looking like a beached whale, ancient and out of place. I had arrived. I circled it slowly. It was bigger than I had imagined, a standard 40-foot container. The snow had piled up against its sides, and long icicles hung from the roof. On the far end were the two large doors, held shut by a heavy-duty locking mechanism. And in that mechanism was a thick, rust-covered padlock. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at it, the snow falling silently around me. This was it, the kingdom, my inheritance. It looked bleak, abandoned, and utterly worthless. But then I remembered the key. I shrugged off my rucksack, my shoulders aching in protest, and dug through the front pocket. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the zipper. Finally, I pulled it out. The old, heavy iron key. It felt like a block of ice in my hand. I walked up to the doors, my boots sinking into the deep snow. The padlock was just as old and rusted as the key. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I had to chip away a thin layer of ice from the keyhole. I pushed the key into the lock. It resisted, grinding against years of rust and neglect. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wouldn't fit, that it was the wrong key, that this whole trip had been a colossal, stupid mistake. I put my other hand on it, summoned what little strength I had left, and turned. There was a loud, groaning crack as the rusted tumblers inside the lock finally gave way. The shackle popped open with a sound that was shockingly loud in the silent woods. It took all my weight to pull one of the heavy doors open. It moved with a screech of tortured metal, the sound of a tomb being opened. I pointed my flashlight inside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a cold, still space. The air that rolled out was frigid and smelled of damp metal, oil, and something else. Something faintly like sawdust and old paper. The inside was mostly empty. It was cavernous and dark, the metal walls sweating with condensation. To the left, there was a simple wooden workbench bolted to the wall. A few old hand tools hung from a pegboard above it. A hammer, a saw, a collection of screwdrivers and wrenches, all coated in a thin layer of rust, but otherwise well cared for. In the far corner, there was a stack of flattened cardboard boxes and a small, pot-bellied wood stove, a rusty pipe leading up through a hole in the roof. Against the right wall, there was a simple cot, just a metal frame with a thin, rolled-up mattress tied with twine. And in the center of the floor, placed with a deliberate, almost ceremonial care, was a single object, a military-issue footlocker. It was olive drab green, with my grandfather's name and serial numbers stenciled in faded white paint on the top. Elias Thorne. It was locked with a smaller but equally sturdy combination lock. I stepped inside, the door groaning shut behind me, plunging me into near-total darkness, save for my flashlight beam. I ran my light over the footlocker. This had to be it. Whatever reason my grandfather had for leaving me this place, the answer had to be in that box. I tried the lock, pulling at it, but it was solid. I had no idea what the combination could be. I felt a surge of frustration. To come all this way, to get this far, only to be stopped by a simple lock. My light scanned the workbench again. The tools, the hammer, a heavy-duty pair of bolt cutters hung from a hook. I could break the lock. I could force my way in. It was tempting, but it felt wrong. It felt like a violation. My grandfather had put that lock on there for a reason. He had left me the key to the container, but not the combination to the box. It was a test, a puzzle. I sat down on the edge of the cold metal cot, the rolled-up mattress digging into my back. I was exhausted, freezing, and my mind felt foggy. What would the combination be? A birthday? A year? I had no idea when he was born. I barely knew him. I pulled out the last birthday card he'd sent me, the one I kept folded in my wallet. I smoothed it out. Be good. Stay strong. I am proud. The date was on the postmark. My 18th birthday. I tried the numbers. Nothing. I tried the year I was born. Nothing. I shone the light around the container again, a desperate search for a clue. My eyes fell on the workbench. Underneath it, tucked away in the shadows, was a small, dusty book. I picked it up. It was a simple, cheap ledger, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. I blew the dust off the cover and opened it. The first few pages were filled with my grandfather's familiar, shaky handwriting. It was a record of expenses. Bags of concrete, lumber, roofing tar, a new axe handle. Simple things. But then, on a page dated about a year ago, there was a different kind of entry. It wasn't a list of supplies. It was a series of numbers. He had circled the last entry. August 4th, 45. August 4th, 1945. It didn't mean anything to me. It wasn't my birthday or my mother's. I almost dismissed it, but something made me pause. I walked back to the footlocker, and with trembling, frozen fingers, I spun the dials. 8, 4, 45. I pulled on the shackle. It clicked open. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the small space. Inside, everything was neat and orderly. On top was a stack of yellowed envelopes tied together with a piece of string. Beneath them was a thick, canvas-wrapped parcel, and beneath that, something that made my blood run cold. Stacks and stacks of cash. $100 bills, bundled in paper bands from a bank. There had to be thousands of dollars there, more than the $10,000 the developer had offered, maybe much more. I ignored the money for a moment, my attention fixed on the letters. I untied the string. The top envelope had my name on it, Leo. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open it. I unfolded the pages within and held them in the beam of my flashlight. The letter began. "My boy," it said in that same familiar script. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found your way home. I am sorry for many things. I am sorry I was not a better grandfather to you. I am sorry I was not there when you needed me most. I want you to understand that my distance was not from a lack of love. It was from a promise I made to your grandmother and to your mother to keep you safe." I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning. I sat down hard on the footlocker, the cold of the metal seeping through my jeans. I read the words again. To keep you safe. Safe from what? I thought back to my childhood, a blur of social workers and strange houses. I had never felt safe. I had only ever felt alone. I took a shaky breath and continued to read. "This land, this box, this is all I have to leave you. It is not much, but it is more than it seems. The money in this box is everything I saved, every penny I put away from my pension, from odd jobs. It is for you, a real start. Not the kind of money that buys you a fancy car, but the kind that buys you time. Time to think, time to build. Use it wisely." I looked at the stacks of cash. It was a staggering amount, a life-changing amount. But it was the next paragraph that truly stopped my heart. "But the money is not the inheritance, Leo. The land is. Do not sell it. I don't care what they offer you. That company, Cascade Holdings, they are vultures. They have been trying to get this land for 30 years. They think it's just a worthless patch of rock, a key parcel to connect their other holdings. They are wrong. Its value is not in the ground, but under it. Before you make any decisions, you must understand the whole story. The rest of these letters will tell you. Read them all, and look for the floorboards." The floorboards. I lowered the letter and shone my light on the floor of the container. It was made of thick, heavy-duty plywood panels, screwed down to the metal frame. They looked solid, uniform. But as I ran the beam along the edge near the workbench, I saw it. One of the panels had screw heads that were slightly different, newer, less rusted than the others. I went to the workbench and took down a heavy, flat-headed screwdriver. My heart was pounding now, a frantic drum against my ribs. The screws were tight, and my hands were still numb, but I worked at them, grunting with effort. One by one, they screeched in protest and came loose. I slid the screwdriver under the edge of the panel and pried it up. It lifted with a groan of wood. Beneath it was a hollow space, about 6 inches deep, and in that space, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp, was another canvas parcel and a long, thin metal box. I lifted them out. The box was heavy. I set it aside and unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a thick binder. I opened it. It was filled with legal documents, geological surveys, water quality reports, and newspaper clippings dating back decades. The clippings were all about Cascade Holdings, detailing a history of environmental violations, lawsuits, and accusations of strong-arming local landowners. The geological surveys were dense with technical language, but one phrase was circled in red ink on almost every page: sole source aquifer. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but it sounded important. I turned my attention to the metal box. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. It was filled with more letters, but also something else. A folded American flag, the kind they give to the family of a fallen soldier. My grandfather's dog tags, a Purple Heart, and a photograph. A black and white photo of a young man in an army uniform, grinning at the camera. He looked impossibly young. He looked like me. It was my grandfather. And the date written on the back was August 4th, 1945. The combination to the lock. The day he came home from the war. I felt a wave of dizziness. This was too much. The cold, the exhaustion, the emotional weight of it all was crushing me. I stumbled back to the cot and sat down, the binder in my lap, the open letter in my hand. I had come here expecting nothing, an empty box on a worthless piece of land. What I had found was a mystery, a legacy, and a burden. The snow was falling harder outside, the wind beginning to howl, rattling the metal walls of the container. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a choice. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the cold, that the easy part was over. The real test, my grandfather's real test, was just beginning. Just then, a pair of headlights cut through the swirling snow, sweeping across the container doors before stopping. A car door slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched towards me. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering, and shoved the binder and the box back under the loose floorboard. I didn't have time to screw it down. I kicked some dirt over the edges to hide the seams as a sharp knock echoed on the metal door. "Hello?" A man's voice called out, slick and confident. "Mr. Thorne? Leo Thorne? My name is Richard Vale from Cascade Holdings. I was told I might find you out here. Can we talk?" The developer. They hadn't even waited a day. They had followed me. I stood there in the dark, my flashlight off, my breath held tight in my chest. He knocked again, harder this time. "Mr. Thorne, it's freezing out here. I just want to talk about the offer. We might even be able to sweeten it a little, seeing as you came all this way." This is the kind of moment that defines you, isn't it? When the easy way out comes knocking on your door, literally. And if you've ever been in a situation like that, where you're cold and tired, and someone is offering you a warm way out, but some small voice inside is telling you to wait, to hold on, I want you to know that you're not alone. So many of us in this community have faced that crossroad. Let me know in the comments if a story about holding on for the right reason is something that speaks to you. Because what happens next is all about that choice. Now let's get back to the story. I stood in the frozen darkness of that shipping container, the developer's voice muffled by the steel door and the howling wind. My mind was racing. The cash in the footlocker, the promise of an even better offer. It was the answer to every problem I had. And yet, I couldn't shake the image of my grandfather's handwriting, the weight of the binder filled with his meticulous research. The money is not the inheritance, Leo. The land is. I took a deep breath, the frigid air burning my lungs, and pulled the heavy door open just a crack. The man outside was silhouetted against the headlights of his expensive-looking SUV. He was wearing a tailored overcoat, completely unsuited for a blizzard in the woods. He smiled a practiced, charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Thorne, Richard Vale, he said, extending a gloved hand. I didn't take it. I just stood there, blocking the entrance. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "We like to keep tabs on properties we're interested in," he said smoothly, his smile not wavering. "When we heard the deed had been transferred, we assumed you might come have a look. A little sentimental journey, I get it. But let's be realistic. This place is, well, it's not much. My company is prepared to offer you $12,000 right now. We can sign the papers in my car, and I can drive you back to the city myself. Put you up in a hotel for the night. You'd be warm, comfortable, with a fresh start in your pocket." $12,000. He'd sweetened the pot without even being asked. He was desperate, and that desperation told me more than his words did. They didn't just want this land, they needed it. I thought about the words in the survey: sole source aquifer. "Why do you want it so bad?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. Miss Albright said it was just scrub and rock. He gave a dismissive little laugh. "It is. Geographically, it's a key piece for our resort's footprint. It connects two larger parcels we already own. It's a logistical issue, that's all. Worth a lot to us, worthless to anyone else. You're in a lucky position, Mr. Thorne." He was a good liar, smooth, believable. If I hadn't found my grandfather's research, I would have taken the deal in a heartbeat. I would have thanked him for his generosity. But I had seen the binder. I knew what was under my feet. "I'm not interested," I said. His smile finally faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it again. "Let's not be hasty. 15,000. That's my final offer. It's more than generous. It's triple the assessed value. You won't get a better offer, I can promise you that." $15,000. A year ago, I would have done almost anything for a tenth of that. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the look in this man's eyes, the predatory gleam of a vulture circling. It was about the weight of that folded flag in the metal box, and the promise my grandfather had made. "The answer is no," I said, and I began to close the door. His hand shot out, stopping it. His charming demeanor was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard edge. "You're making a mistake, kid. You're a homeless vet living in a shelter. Don't let some misplaced sentimentality cloud your judgment. This is a winning lottery ticket, and you're about to tear it up. Take the money." "It's not for sale," I said, my voice low and steady. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel like a charity case. I felt like Elias Thorne's grandson. I put my shoulder into the door and pushed. He was stronger than he looked, but I had leverage and desperation on my side. The door slammed shut with a deafening clang, and I threw the heavy locking bar into place. I stood there, my back against the cold steel, listening. I could hear him cursing outside. A moment later, the car door slammed, and the engine roared to life. The headlights swung away, and the SUV sped off down the dirt road, its tires spinning in the snow. Then, silence. The only sound was the wind and the frantic beating of my own heart. I had done it. I had turned down a fortune. I had picked a fight with a powerful company. I was alone, in a blizzard, in an unheated metal box, with no plan and no idea what to do next. A wave of pure terror washed over me. Had I just made the biggest mistake of my life? I sank to the floor, my legs giving out. I was shaking again, the deep, body-racking tremor I knew all too well. I buried my face in my hands. What had I done? What was I supposed to do now? I felt a piece of paper under my hand. It was the first letter. I picked it up and angled it toward my flashlight beam, which was growing weaker. The money is not the inheritance, Leo. The land is. I took a long, shuddering breath and forced myself to get up. Panic wouldn't help. Fear wouldn't keep me warm. I needed a plan. I needed to survive the night. First things first, fire. I looked at the pot-bellied stove. It was old, but looked solid. I checked the flue. It seemed clear. Next to the stove was a small pile of kindling and a few split logs, dry and protected from the damp. My grandfather had left them for me. Of course he had. He had thought of everything. There was even a tin of matches on a small ledge. It took me a few tries with my numb fingers, but soon I had a small fire going. The little stove began to radiate a gentle, life-giving warmth. I pulled the rolled-up mattress from the cot and spread it on the floor as close to the stove as I dared. Then I pulled out the rest of the letters and the binder. The story was here. It was time to learn what I was fighting for. I spent the rest of that night reading by the flickering light of the fire and my dying flashlight. The letters, read in chronological order, told a story that was bigger and more tragic than I could have imagined. My grandfather, Elias, had come home from the war a changed man. He'd met my grandmother, a local girl, and they had built a life here. He had bought this land not as an investment, but as a sanctuary, a place to be quiet, a place to heal. Then Cascade Holdings came to town 30 years ago. Back then, they were a smaller, more aggressive company. They started buying up land for a proposed ski resort, using threats and intimidation on the local families who had lived here for generations. My grandfather, a man who had faced down enemies on the battlefield, refused to be intimidated. He started organizing his neighbors. He did research, and he discovered their secret. The resort they wanted to build was right on top of the watershed for the entire valley. The aquifer, this massive underground reservoir of pure, clean water, was the lifeblood of Northwood and all the small towns downstream. The construction, the runoff, the chemicals they would use to maintain the resort, it would poison everything. He presented his findings to the town council. He fought them tooth and nail, and he won. The project was shut down. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The letters grew darker. Cascade didn't forgive or forget. They started a campaign of harassment, lawsuits, vandalism, threats. My grandmother got sick around that time. The stress, my grandfather wrote, made it worse. She passed away. A few years later, my mother, who had been helping him fight, was in a car accident. The police called it an accident, but my grandfather never believed it. He was convinced her brake lines had been cut. He had no proof, just a deep, gnawing certainty. That was when he sent me away. He was broken, consumed by grief and fear. He saw Cascade's shadow everywhere. He believed they would come for me next. So he cut ties. He let the state take me, believing that anonymity was the only way to keep me safe. He watched me from a distance, getting updates from a private investigator he paid with what little money he had. He was protecting me by abandoning me. The pain of that choice was in every word he wrote. He had sacrificed his relationship with his only grandson to keep a promise to the wife and daughter he had lost. The final letter was dated just a few weeks before he died. Leo, it concluded, I have failed in many ways. but I never failed in my love for you, and I never gave up this land. It is a trust. This water is a gift, and it belongs to everyone. The fight is not over. Cascade is back, quieter this time, more corporate. They think with me gone, this land is theirs for the taking. They don't know about you. They don't know that a thorn still stands guard. The choice is yours, my boy. You can take the money I left you and walk away. No one would blame you. Build a new life. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to fight, know that you will not be alone. The truth is in the binder, and the heart of this town is good. They just need a leader, someone to remind them what they're fighting for. Be good, stay strong. I am proud of you, no matter what you choose. Your loving grandfather, Elias. I finished the last letter as the fire in the stove burned down to glowing embers. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale gray light through the snowy clearing. I was crying. Silent tears streamed down my face, for the grandfather I never knew, for the family I had lost, for the lonely boy I had been. All those years I had thought I was abandoned. I was being protected. All that time I felt worthless. I was the last hope of a dying man's promise. The anger and grief inside me slowly cooled, hardening into something else. Resolve. The choice wasn't a choice at all. How could I walk away now? How could I sell his sacrifice for a pocketful of cash from the very people who had destroyed his life? I couldn't. I wouldn't. This wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It was a battlefield. It was a memorial. It was my home. I got up, my body stiff and sore, but my mind clear. I added the last of the logs to the fire. Then I opened the footlocker and counted the money. It was just over $50,000. A war chest. My grandfather hadn't just left me a mission, he had left me the means to fight it. I spent the next few days in a blur of activity. The blizzard passed, leaving the world pristine and white under a brilliant blue sky. I used the bolt cutters from the workbench to break off the old lock on the footlocker and put a new one on. Then I walked the 2 miles back into town. My first stop was the general store. Cal, the owner, was there. He looked up when the bell chimed, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Survived the storm, did you? I was about to send a sheriff out looking for you." "I'm all right," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need some supplies." I bought a new flashlight, batteries, a propane camp stove, canned food, coffee, a warm sleeping bag, thick socks, and a pair of insulated work gloves. I paid in cash, peeling the bills from a thick roll. Cal's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't say anything. As he was bagging everything up, I asked, "Do you remember the trouble with Cascade Holdings from years ago?" Cal's smile vanished. His face grew hard. "I remember it. A dark time for this town. Your granddad was in the thick of it. He was a hero, son. Don't let anyone tell you different. Why do you ask?" "They're back," I said simply. "They sent a man out to the property during the storm, offered me $15,000 for it." Cal stopped what he was doing and stared at me. "What did you tell him?" I told him no. A long silence hung in the store. Cal looked at me, his gaze searching, and then he nodded slowly, a look of profound respect in his eyes. "Good," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That's good. Elias would be proud." He finished bagging my things and pushed them across the counter. "This is on the house.
No, I can pay, I insisted. I know you can, he said, his eyes twinkling. But this is a welcome home gift. You're going to need your money for other things if you're picking up your granddad's fight. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You're not alone in this, kid. A lot of folks in this town owe Elias Thorne. We haven't forgotten. I walked out of that store with more than just supplies. I walked out with a sense of purpose and the first stirrings of hope. The next person I needed to see was Martha at the diner. I ordered a coffee and sat at the counter, waiting for a quiet moment.
When the lunch rush died down, I showed her the binder. I opened it to the newspaper clippings about the first fight with Cascade, the ones with pictures of the town council meetings. There were photos of a much younger Cal and of a fiery young woman with dark hair arguing at a podium. "That's my mother," Martha said softly, her finger tracing the woman's face in the grainy photo. "She was on the council back then. She fought alongside your grandfather. It cost her. She lost her re-election. People have short memories when money is involved." She looked up at me, her eyes sad but fierce. "What are you going to do, Leo?" "I'm going to finish what he started," I said. Martha refilled my coffee cup, her hand steady. "Then you'll need a lawyer, a good one, not some slick city suit." She scribbled a name and number on a napkin. "Sarah Jenkins. Her father was a farmer Cascade tried to run out of business. She went to law school for one reason, to make sure it never happened again. Tell her Martha sent you, and tell her it's about the Thorne property. She'll know what it means." I left the diner with a lawyer's number in my pocket and a growing sense of alliance. My grandfather was right. The heart of this town was good. It was just sleeping. My last stop for the day was a payphone. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number from Ms. Albright's office in the city. When her assistant put me through, her voice was as crisp and professional as ever. "Mr. Thorne, I was wondering when I might hear from you. Have you had a chance to reconsider the developer's offer?" "I have," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm not selling. Not now, not ever. I'd like to retain your services, Ms. Albright. I have reason to believe that Cascade Holdings is engaged in fraudulent and predatory business practices concerning my property and the surrounding area. I have evidence, and I'm going to fight them." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, for the first time, I heard something other than professional detachment in her voice. I heard a smile. "I see," she said. "Well, this just became a much more interesting case. Send me everything you have, Mr. Thorne. Let's get to work." As I hung up the phone, I looked back down the main street of Northwood. The sun was glinting off the snow, the air was clean and cold. It wasn't much of a town, but it was starting to feel like something I belonged to. I had a home. I had a mission. I had allies. I still had a long, hard road ahead of me. The legal battle would be brutal, and Cascade would not play fair. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting for something. I started the long walk back to the container, my new supplies heavy on my back, but my spirit feeling lighter than it had in years. The container wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was my command post. It was the fortress my grandfather had built, and I was the soldier standing guard. The following weeks settled into a new kind of rhythm. My life became a cycle of hard physical labor and intense strategic planning. The $50,000 my grandfather left me was a blessing, but I knew it wouldn't last forever, especially with legal fees on the horizon. I had to be smart. I had to be frugal. I treated it like a campaign budget, allocating funds for essentials only. My first project was making the container a home. It was a metal box, but it was my metal box. I used some of the money to buy a small, quiet generator from Cal's store, which gave me power for a couple of work lights and a hot plate. I bought lumber and insulation and spent days framing the interior walls, stuffing them with thick pink batting that would hold back the brutal winter cold. I was no carpenter, but I was meticulous. I measured twice, cut once, just like my squad leader had taught me. Every board I put up felt like an act of defiance. Every nail I hammered home was a statement. I am here. I am not leaving. I found a small used wood stove that was more efficient than the old pot-bellied one and installed it myself, carefully sealing the flue. The steady, quiet heat it produced changed everything, turning the cold metal shell into a warm, dry sanctuary. I built a proper bed frame, a small table, and shelves for my food. I was building a life, one 2x4 at a time. The physical work was grounding. It tired my body and quieted my mind. When I was sawing a board or running electrical wire, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was focused on the task at hand, on creating something solid and real. In the evenings, I worked on the legal battle. I spent hours poring over my grandfather's binder, organizing the documents, and making copies of everything. I sent a thick package to Ms. Albright and another to Sarah Jenkins, the local lawyer Martha had recommended. Sarah called me the day after she received it. Her voice was pure steel. "Mr. Thorne, this is incredible," she said, the excitement palpable, even over the phone. "Your grandfather was a hell of a researcher. This is more than just a property dispute. The evidence of Cascade's long-term intent to defraud the community, the history of environmental negligence. This is a class-action lawsuit waiting to happen. We can bury them." We began to build the case. Sarah worked the local angle, talking to older residents, digging up old town records, and finding other families who had been pressured by Cascade over the years. Ms. Albright, with her big city firm, handled the corporate side, filing injunctions and motions that tied Cascade up in a web of legal red tape, preventing them from doing any work on the adjacent properties while our case was pending. Richard Vale, the slick agent who had visited me in the storm, tried to approach me again, this time with an offer of $50,000. I told him to talk to my lawyers. He never came back. Life in Northwood was quiet, but I was not alone. Cal would drop off supplies for me at the end of Old Mill Road, so I wouldn't have to walk into town as often. Martha would pack me a hot meal whenever I did come in, refusing to take my money. People started to talk. They had seen the lights at the old Thorne place. They knew Elias's grandson was back. Some were wary, remembering the trouble from last time. But others, the ones who remembered my grandfather's courage, would give me a quiet nod when I passed them on the street. It was a small thing, but it felt like a promise. One afternoon, an old pickup truck rumbled down my road. An elderly man with a face as weathered as my grandfather's got out. He introduced himself as George, one of the farmers whose land bordered mine. "I knew your granddad," he said, his voice raspy. "We fought those bastards together 30 years ago. Heard you were taking up the fight." He looked at the work I'd done on the container, the neat stack of firewood, the insulated stovepipe. "Heard you were staying." "I'm staying," I confirmed. He nodded, a slow, satisfied gesture. "Good. Cascade's been sniffing around my place again, offering me stupid money. My kids think I should take it. They don't remember what it was like." He kicked at a stone with the toe of his boot. "If you need a hand with anything, you let me know. A community's got to stick together." It was a turning point. George started telling people his story. Sarah Jenkins started holding informal meetings in the back room of the diner. More people came forward with their own stories of Cascade's tactics. The fear that had kept the town quiet for so long was beginning to crack. The heart of the town was waking up. My days were long, my body was tired, but my spirit felt clean. I was living on my own terms, in a place I had built with my own hands, fighting for a cause I believed in. The ghosts of the desert were still there, but they were quieter now. The tremor in my hands was almost gone. I was too busy, too focused, to let them have any power. I was no longer homeless. I had a home, not just in the insulated walls of the container, but in the purpose I had found, in the community that was slowly, cautiously embracing me. Months passed. Winter thawed into a muddy, wet spring. The legal battle raged on, a slow, grinding war of attrition, fought with paper and depositions instead of bullets. Cascade threw money at the problem, hiring a team of expensive lawyers from the city. But we had something they didn't. We had the truth. We had my grandfather's binder. And we had a town that was finding its voice again. One evening, I was sitting at the small table I had built, reviewing some documents Sarah had sent over. There was a knock on my door. It was Martha from the diner. She was holding a covered dish. "Thought you might be tired of canned chili," she said, her smile warm. She stepped inside, looking around at the small, neat space I had created. The insulated walls, the shelves, the warm glow of the lights. "Elias would love this," she said softly. "He always said this place was a sanctuary. You've made it one." We sat and ate the beef stew she'd brought, its warmth spreading through me. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We talked about the town, about the coming spring, about my grandfather. She told me stories about him, about his quiet humor and his unshakable integrity. She helped me fill in the missing pieces of the man I had only known through his letters. When she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her taillights disappear down the road. The stars were out, a brilliant cold spray across the night sky. More stars than I had ever seen in the city. The air smelled of pine and melting snow. A profound sense of peace settled over me. This was it. This was the inheritance. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the land itself. It was this feeling, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of being part of something bigger than myself, the feeling of being home. The fight was far from over. I knew there would be more challenges, more threats, more days when I would feel like giving up. But standing there, under the vast, silent sky, I felt a strength I had never known. It was my grandfather's strength. It was the town's strength. And now, it was mine. I closed the door to my small, warm home and got back to work. There was a long night ahead, and I had a legacy to protect. The spring and summer were a long, drawn-out siege. Cascade's lawyers tried everything to have the case dismissed. They filed motion after motion, trying to drown us in paperwork and bleed us dry. They painted me in the press as an opportunistic drifter, squatting on a worthless piece of land, holding up progress for personal gain. They painted Sarah as a small-town lawyer in over her head. But they underestimated us. They underestimated the town. and they had no idea about the meticulous evidence my grandfather had collected. We fought back. Sarah was brilliant, countering their every move with a calm, unshakable competence. Ms. Albright's firm provided the financial and legal muscle we needed to stay in the fight. The $50,000 from my grandfather was dwindling fast, but every time it seemed like we were at the end of our rope, something would happen. The town organized a bake sale to raise money for our legal fund. George and the other farmers donated produce for a community barbecue. Cal put a donation jar on the counter of his store. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was a community refusing to be broken. I became the public face of the fight, a role I never wanted. Sarah convinced me to speak at a town hall meeting. I stood in front of 100 people in the school gymnasium, my hands shaking, my voice barely a whisper at first. I didn't talk about legal statutes or property lines. I talked about my grandfather. I read from his letters. I told them about his sacrifice, about his love for this town and the water that sustained it. I told them that this wasn't just my fight. It was their fight. It was for their homes, their children, their future. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, someone in the back started clapping. Then another. Soon the entire room was on its feet, the applause echoing off the gymnasium walls. It was in that moment that I knew we were going to win. Cascade had money and power, but we had heart. We had a story. We had a reason to fight that went deeper than a balance sheet. The turning point came in late August, almost a year to the day since I had first arrived. Cascade, frustrated by the legal delays, tried to start preliminary survey work on the land adjacent to mine. It was a provocation, a move designed to intimidate us. But it backfired. When their surveyors arrived, they were met by a line of 50 townspeople, standing shoulder to shoulder at the entrance to Old Mill Road. George was there with his tractor. Martha was there with a dozen other women from the town, holding signs that read, "Water is life," and "Northwood is not for sale." And I was there, standing at the front. It was a silent, peaceful protest. We just stood there. The surveyors, confused and outnumbered, made a few calls and then packed up and left. It was a small victory, but it was a powerful one. The story, along with a photo of our makeshift blockade, was picked up by a regional newspaper. Suddenly, our small-town fight was getting statewide attention. Environmental groups started calling. Other communities who had been bullied by Cascade reached out to offer support. The narrative was changing. We weren't obstacles to progress anymore. We were protectors. Finally, facing a public relations nightmare and a mountain of incriminating evidence, Cascade blinked. Their lawyers called Sarah with an offer to settle. They would drop all plans they would sell the adjacent parcels of land to a state-run conservation trust, and they would establish a multi-million-dollar fund for the protection of the Northwood Aquifer. In return, we would drop our class action lawsuit. We had won. It was a complete and total victory. The news spread through town like wildfire. That night, the whole town gathered in the park for an impromptu celebration. Someone set off fireworks. Cal brought out coolers of drinks from his store. There was music and laughter. It felt like the end of a long war. As I stood on the edge of the celebration, watching the families and friends laughing together. Sarah came and stood beside me. "You did it, Leo," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Your grandfather would be so proud." I thought about him then, the quiet man with the sad eyes and the stubborn will. He had planted a seed of defiance 30 years ago, and I had just been the one lucky enough to see it bloom. "We did it," I corrected her. "All of us." The legal victory was the end of the fight, but it was the beginning of my life. With the threat gone, I could finally think about the future. I still had some of my grandfather's money left. I could have left Northwood, gone anywhere, done anything. But the thought of leaving never crossed my mind. This was my home. These were my people. I used the rest of the money to buy the container and the 5 acres from myself, legally putting it in my name. Then I invested the rest into a small business. With George's help, I started a small-scale organic farm on the land, using sustainable practices that would protect the aquifer my grandfather had fought so hard to save. It was hard work, harder than anything I had ever done. But every seed I planted felt like a tribute. Every vegetable I harvested felt like a victory. Life became simple. It was about the rhythm of the seasons, the feel of the soil in my hands, the quiet satisfaction of a day's hard work. The container remained my home, but I continued to improve it. I added a small solar panel array on the roof for electricity. I built a deck out front where I could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset through the pine trees. It wasn't a big house. It wasn't a fancy life, but it was mine. I am telling you this story now, a few years later, sitting on that very deck. The farm is thriving. I sell my produce at the local farmer's market, and Martha's Diner is my best customer. The tremor in my hands is gone for good. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I take out my grandfather's letters and read them again. They remind me of where I came from, and of the man who gave me a second chance at life. My inheritance wasn't a rusty metal box or a pile of cash. It was a purpose. It was a community. It was the chance to build a life of meaning. It taught me that home isn't a place you find. It's a place you build. It's a choice you make every single day to stand for something, to protect something, to love something. And that's a lesson that I want to share with all of you. So many of us are given inheritances we don't understand at first. Sometimes it's a burden, sometimes it's a responsibility, and sometimes it's a rusty old box in the middle of nowhere. But inside that challenge, there is often a gift waiting to be discovered. The gift of purpose. The gift of a new story. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever found your own unexpected inheritance, I hope you'll share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one. This community is built on people who understand that the most valuable things in life are rarely the things that come easy. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, because there are so many more stories of hope and resilience to share, and yours might be one of them.